Good afternoon and welcome to our podcast number 6 of the Tepeyac Institute. We have these dialogues and now we are so glad to have here with us Father Bob Mosher. Some of you may know him because he's been here very active in the city, but I want to allow him to introduce himself. Father, how do you present yourself to the people here of the diocese?
Well, thank you very much for this invitation, first of all, Deacon. I appreciate this initiative. It's very important that people feel connected to what we offer as a Tepeyac Institute. I've been here for nearly 10 years now. I arrived in 2011. That's right, 2011. After 30 years in Chile, I was very glad to get the position of director of the Columban Mission Center in downtown El Paso, and also to have the opportunity to offer what I can to the Tepeyac Institute as one of their instructors. I'm 67 years old at the moment, so I'm getting all kinds of benefits for being an old person, all kinds of discounts and whatnot. So life is looking pretty rosy at the moment. But of course, I'm terribly concerned about the pandemic and its effect on our community here in El Paso. I suppose I should say a few more things about me. I'm the oldest of 5 children. My mother is 90 years old at the moment. My father passed away also about 10 years ago. And my mother's beginning to deal with dementia a couple of times. So I'm actually here in Massachusetts at the moment to accompany my sisters as they take care of my mother, which is a bit distressing, but also very educational. It's almost like an academic course in itself, where it's like we're getting a doctorate in how to care for the elderly. And my mother is the professor in this case and is teaching us every day with some surprises that we haven't seen before. So it can test your patience, as I'm sure many people listening to this probably have already had the experience of caring for elderly relatives. I happen to have a degree in Masters of Divinity from the Jesuit Western School of Theology, which has since become part of Boston College School of Theology and Ministry. And I also had the opportunity to receive a doctorate in missiology from the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, also a Jesuit institution. So I have very warm feelings for the Jesuits, who are much older and much bigger than the Columban Fathers. The Columban Fathers was founded just a little over 100 years ago, very young in the history of the church. And we first went to China and then ended up serving the people of about 16 different nations that we're in today. Still a small number of us, only a couple of hundred are still in active ministry. But it's been a wonderful experience as a Columban, accompanying, in my case, the people of Chile in one of their darkest chapters, the dictatorship that lasted from 1973 to 1990, and which had such profound effects on myself and how I understand priesthood and church and social justice. It's been a lifetime of education that the Lord has called me to.
And Father, how did you end up being a Columban priest?
Well, the Columbans were felt to be a good match for me, not least of which is because of my own Irish heritage. The Columbans were founded in Ireland to go to China, but Americans and Australians and New Zealanders had been a part of the Society of St. Columban, as we call ourselves more formally, from the very beginning in 1918. So we were international to begin with. But I think my own Irish heritage, my grandparents came from Ireland, 3 of the 4 of them. And so I knew much about Irish culture just growing up in my own family. And that, I think, helped me to understand the kind of social environment that dominates the Columban Fathers and their outlook as well. One of the very positive effects is that the Columban fathers, having an Irish history in their foundation approved by the Irish bishops, they tend to have a kind of a sixth sense, a kind of a natural ability to sympathize with those who may be going through situations that the Irish had to suffer for several centuries under British domination. Anytime, it's amazing to see whenever I observe the Irish priests or nuns when they first arrive in a country like Chile, it takes them no time at all, even before they even speak the language, to sense who is being treated unjustly. They just have this natural ability when they start hearing words like landlords or patrones, like in Chile, they automatically begin to sense and to expect that there's exploitation going on. And indeed, uh, there is. It usually takes North Americans like myself, who were brought up in a white middle class background, it takes us longer to get to the same realization that people are being treated unjustly. I think our tendency is just to believe that people are all the same and tend to act out of generous hearts, but it's not the case. And so we eventually wake up to realize what Irish and other peoples realize what's going on much more quickly than we do.
So your experience in Chile, it was a unique experience. Those times were difficult. Were you able to feel that mistreatment of people or who were mistreated as you walk in there?
Yes, I could see it right away. I arrived there in 1980, and the Columbans work in the poorest areas in most of the countries that we're in. So I was assigned to a parish and a poblacion on the western outskirts of Santiago. And the fear and the oppression were just part of the atmosphere. People were very quiet and careful about who they spoke to, and random arrests and torture, killings, exile from the country could be so arbitrary and so savagely applied to people just at random. And I could see this going on, as well as the terrible poverty and living under a government that was not only oppressive, but also ignored people's real needs. So that housing had always been a very big problem in Chile, and it just got worse during the 17 years of the Pinochet dictatorship because the dictatorship felt no obligation to help solve the housing crisis. Um, that was one of the terrible things about the dictatorship I could see was that it was imposing a North American ideology, kind of a commercial and economic theory that was cooked up in the University of Chicago. It's part of what was later called the crisis economics. Whenever there was a disaster in a certain area, such as most recently after Hurricane Katrina, for instance, Milton Friedman would begin to send his students and those who had gotten degrees from the University of Chicago in economics, he would actually recommend going to those places because they could set up ways to exploit the local resources and use people who were desperate to work. And that's what happened in Chile. Chile was, I think, the first application on a massive scale of the University of Chicago School of Economics theory on liberal economics, which is basically an economic system that has no conscience. It only sees opportunities for allowing rich entities and corporations to get even richer by taking advantage of a disaster and starting from zero. Some projects of privatizing education in our country and other countries also took advantage of this. As I mentioned, Hurricane Katrina, for instance, in that point of view of that school of economics, actually set up many private schools intended to privatize education in Louisiana afterwards because everything was destroyed. The infrastructure for education was literally wiped out by Hurricane Katrina, and the Milton Friedman himself and his followers just kind of rubbed their hands with glee over this tremendous opportunity to set up a for-profit education system. The consequences are evident even today. Many of you may have heard of the social protests that spread throughout Chile like wildfire last year. And that has actually produced a recent vote on a new constitution, because the old constitution up until this year was one that was cooked up by Pinochet himself in 1980, precisely to make the country more amenable to this kind of valueless, capitalistic, extreme liberal economy that would allow Chile to be taken advantage of by foreign companies and lose its resources, and with the profits going only to a certain sector of society. That's really what caused 30 years later, after the dictatorship ended, people just wouldn't put up with it anymore. They found that selling drugs was becoming something that would provide at least a minimal income for the very poor, with all the vice that would promote and violence. And the effects of the Pinochet constitution were just so devastating for most of the people in Chile that they finally revolted. And now they are coming up with a new constitution. They voted in a plebiscite to have a new constitution, and now they're in the process of actually planning, with the participation of their elected representatives, but also ensuring voices from the people themselves who are not elected, to have a constitutional assembly very soon.
That's
I'm
good.
so happy to see this stuff, because it really was something I could see over the years. First, during the dictatorship, when people would disappear or be tortured by the thousands. And then later on, when democracy came back, it seemed like a miracle, because it was a peaceful transition in 1990. But then the politicians that were elected, even from the Socialist Party, were just accepting the old 1980 constitution and allowing companies to come in and to exploit the natural resources while paying very little to the workers of the country.
That's terrible. And I heard a friend of mine told me once that if we take all the money in the world, all of it, and we distribute it equally, tomorrow there's going to be rich people and poor people, because some people take advantage of the ingenuity of others, and things like that happen. And probably that's a little bit of what has been happening in Chile for these years, that some people have been taking advantage of the situations, and even after the dictatorship, they still were able to get in and do the same, right?
Yes, although we, as people of the faith community, and as loyal to the teachings of the gospel, we can't allow ourselves to become fatalistic. We are all invited to be part of God's project in the world, which is to create a more just society and a more equitable distribution of the world's wealth. It's not a natural phenomenon to wind up with injustice in our society. This injustice is, of course, a form of hatred and destruction of people, that people like ourselves, people of faith, people of the gospel, we are invited to oppose, and even find that the new life we receive in Christ is something that frees us from our own selfishness and makes us a part of projects of greater social and economic justice in the world. So we are the natural enemies of injustice, because God has called us to be signs of hope for the poor, especially, and the vulnerable. And so we will never just fold our arms, cruzar los brazos, as we say in Spanish.
Mhm.
We know that this is an opportunity to live our faith, for which we will be held accountable, as the Gospels of the recent Sundays
Mhm.
have told us. We have to be like the the young women who had enough oil in their lamps to be able to receive Jesus and to give an account of their lives. When the bridegroom comes, he's going to be expecting us to be lit up with works of justice and good as part of our lives, and not be looking for last minute solutions when time runs out.
Mhm. Yes, definitely. We are called to that. And when you came here to El Paso, Father, when you came here, uh, you were coming back to the United States, and being in the United States seems that the things are going to be different, right? That's the idea. But what happened?
Yes, indeed. Well, living here in El Paso was such an agreeable experience for me. I could continue to speak in Spanish, which I had learned while I was in Chile, and to accompany the vulnerable, who in this case were the migrants who came to our country looking to escape violence and poverty and to contribute from their cultures to the richness of our country. But of course, I came at the same time that great injustices were committed, especially those of the past 4 years or so, but also before that, where families were divided and people were treated very badly just for looking for safety among us. Our Christian faith has been sorely tested, but here in El Paso, I was very inspired and edified by the response of the people of El Paso to the many people looking for safety among us and who needed a place to stay temporarily in most cases. And El Paso just opened its doors uh, about 5 or 6 years ago. I'm sure you'll remember. That was so enriching for me. It really brought home to me and to the people who would visit the border, whose trips I would organize. Really brought it home when we heard the voices and saw the faces of those who were forced to leave their home countries for any number of reasons. We were face to face with ourselves in a sense, and the golden rule was right there. So many of us realized what would we do in those circumstances, and what are the causes of so much migration. And we realized that people in need happen to be the migrants today, but it could be us tomorrow. And wouldn't we rather be treated as we would like to be treated rather than to be turned away and left in very dangerous circumstances for ourselves and for our families?
Yes.
There was a real education coming here.
And this area, being a border area, it is so difficult to assimilate because El Paso is one of the poorest cities in the United States, and Juarez is one of the richest cities in Mexico. But still, there's a huge contrast between those two cities. But the population here in El Paso, a large percentage of the population speaks Spanish. So, in a way, you don't feel like you are in the United States, but also you are not in Mexico. So this is like a completely different experience. Do you agree with this?
Yes, with some differences. I like the image of a binational community. One of the first things we do with groups of visitors that come for the border awareness experience here in El Paso is to bring them up to Murchison Park up on Mount Franklin and give them a good view of the whole area. And people see at the beginning of their experience here that they can only see from Murchison Park a single community. It's very difficult to figure out where the border is when you look down from a great height. And this is an important way to begin their experience here, we think, that they begin to see that here is a rich binational community that has managed to synthesize the contributions from various cultures and languages into one way of life, where people go back and forth over the border every day to school, to work, to their lives, to their homes. It's a very fluid interchange between the two communities, made a lot more difficult recently. But generally speaking, with a sense that we are all in this together, and that a border is a limited concept. You can never cut yourself completely off from your neighbors on the other side of a political division. And in a sense, what happens to them happens to us as well.
Correct. Right now that we are struggling with the COVID-19, we are seeing the numbers in Juarez. Juarez is approaching the 2,000 people dead, which is a very high number. Here in El Paso, we are on the 800s, but still we are a community and we see people going across the bridge according to that border that you see. It's just a line on the floor. but it doesn't divide us because we are in solidarity, both communities. And what is very interesting is that the migrants that are coming right now, they are not Mexican migrants, because that's the idea some people had up north, that the migrants are coming from Mexico. But no, the migrants are now coming from Guatemala, Honduras, and other Central American countries. And I know you have been very active there, along with Father Bill, right? With the migrants coming.
It's one of the priorities of the Columban Fathers is to accompany migrants, no matter what country we're in. And we do this in each one of the 16 countries that we have missioners in. And our missioners come from many of those countries too. Along with Father Bill and myself, we're from the States. We also have Father Felipe from Korea working with us, and the lay missionaries, Sainyana from the islands of Fiji in the South Pacific, and Rosa from the Philippines are also part of our border ministry team. And yes, we're seeing this. It's the church must always have a special presence among the vulnerable. So for us, one of the groups that are most vulnerable in the world today are migrants. And it is there that God speaks to us in a very special way that is challenging, and that helps us to grow into the new persons in Christ that St. Paul speaks of. Each of us is being made anew and transformed by God's grace, thanks to the victory of Christ over death and sin and over selfishness. We have a share in that rising to new life. That new life is seen in our solidarity and accompaniment of the vulnerable, in our case of the migrants that we are graced to accompany here at the border and doing what we can. Thanks to Father Bill, we have a good relationship with Ruben Garcia and the Annunciation House, a network of shelters now that has grown just as the number of migrants has grown. And at the moment is setting up shelters in Juarez for the migrants who are forced to wait in Mexico while they ask for asylum in the United States, a year, sometimes 2 years, staying in Juarez and living in very precarious circumstances, a terrible situation. But together with El Pasoans, who in general, El Pasoans have a great sense of solidarity with migrants because most of the people here can remember their parents or their grandparents in a very similar situation. And so there's this deep solidarity among our local people here for the people who are forced to wait in Mexico by the hundreds and thousands while they appeal for the basic dignity of being respected as human beings in need.
Definitely, Pope Francis is inviting us to discover Christ in the migrant.
What a grace to have a man like Francis as our spiritual leader at the moment. He really is from the very first moments of his papacy, he made special trips to the refugee centers in Italy and gave a strong message just by his actions as well as his words of solidarity and the great opportunity that it is for our countries to be generous and seeing this as a chance for moral and spiritual growth as a people.
Yes. You know, the Vatican Council II documents are inviting us to see each other as the people of God, all of us, no matter differences in our colors, culture, religion, etc. And the goal that we have at Tepeyac Institute is to create a civilization of love. That's the name that we love. And I was talking to Jack Mooney about it. He was here in this program. And he said, this is the goal, that we create a civilization of love where we are citizens in a world where love is given to each other. So I know the Colombian priests are working on that. I know Father Bill, is he going across the border every day, or is he in Juarez now, or where is he?
He's living at our parish in Juarez on the western outskirts of the city in Rancho Anapra. We are responsible for the entire community of Rancho Anapra with one single parish out there. And he's living there. He's doing what he can to accompany the people. He's had a lot of funerals, you can imagine. He's
Yes.
been trying to confirm some groups of young adults, but some of that has had to be suspended because the Diocese of Juarez, similar to our diocese, has closed just about everything down in terms of sacramental services. So he's there. He's there right now and doing what he can to visit people individually, maintaining social distance, distributing food and face masks.
Yeah.
Deacon, I'm going to have to leave you now.
Yes, sure.
Well,
Thank you for joining us, Father, and the best wishes and blessings for you. Okay.
thank you, Deacon.
Okay. Bye
Have
bye.
a nice evening.